What's poppin', y'all? Welcome back to another episode of NBA Weekly. I'm your host, Pee Wee the Plug, and they finally did it. The Brooklyn Nets have decided to fire and part ways with Steve Nash, and in a very quick turnaround, they've decided to move into the next part of hiring Ime Udoka from the Boston Celtics during his suspension to be their next head coach. Now, because that's so much to unpack, because we have a hiring and we also have a firing, I want to address the first part of this, which is the firing and parting ways with Steve Nash. Now, on social media, Steve Nash released something that's more than a statement, right? A lot of times, coaches, players, or people in the front office, they part ways with the organization, and there's a very short statement, to save face or to make it seem like everything is okay. This, to me, is a little bit more than a statement, and it makes it feel like it's not an ugly or messy breakup type situation. This is two sides coming together and agreeing that going separate ways will be best for both parties. Steve Nash in his letter says, "Thank you, Brooklyn. A very heartfelt thanks to Joe and Clara, along with Sean Marks, for giving me the opportunity to coach the Brooklyn Nets. It was an amazing experience with many challenges that I'm incredibly grateful for. It was a pleasure to work with the players, performance team, and front office every day. I'm especially grateful to my coaching staff and video room, who are a talented group with so much character and professionalism. Lastly, thanks to Brooklyn and the passionate fans who support this team. Family first, and my family has found a home here and loves being a part of this beautiful community. I wish the Nets all success in the world, and the Nashes will be rooting for our team as they turn this season around." So to me, this is very genuine. There's things that you can highlight in this statement, things like our team, the family first, and how they feel comfortable being a part of the Brooklyn community. It feels like there's no bad blood. And again, this is not messy. This is classy. And this is, again, two parties coming together and deciding that going opposite directions are beneficial for both sides. And you can't be mad at that. Now, I'm never a person or never a guy, especially in sports or even outside of sports, where I'm praying or wishing on the downfall, failure, or lack of success for anyone. But the reason I say finally parting ways with Steve Nash is because I think this is something that is very beneficial to the Brooklyn Nets. Now, the entire tenure of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving with the new Brooklyn Nets, the whole dysfunctional lack of success, not achieving or reaching or meeting the expectations that a lot of us have put on this team since they acquired both of those guys, that doesn't fall on Steve Nash at all. In my opinion, Steve Nash is not the sole person to blame. There were a lot of unfortunate events that occurred. Kevin Durant came into the situation with an injury. Kyrie Irving and a vaccine mandate was something that they couldn't have predicted. James Harden getting there to Brooklyn and then it kind of blowing up in smoke out of nowhere, and he wants out was something they couldn't predict. And then all of a sudden to have to then acquire Ben Simmons in the middle of a situation where he's not comfortable being on the basketball court and playing, and then his back injury and everything in this offseason of Kyrie maybe opting in, maybe opting out and going to the Lakers, Kevin Durant's trade request, the state of Ben Simmons and is he going to play and is he going to be ready mentally. All of these things are things that no one a part of the situation could have predicted, and it's so tough to try to put all of that on Steve Nash or Sean Marks, which is what I felt the Brooklyn Nets were trying to communicate this offseason when Kevin Durant wanted out. It's just been a big mess and a bunch of unfortunate events that everybody takes responsibility for, and the best thing to do is to try to work through all of this and get to a place where they can be the team with all of these expectations and they can play at a high level that we all feel like they can do. With that being said, for them to reach those expectations, I personally, as a basketball mind, feel that the inevitable thing was to part ways with Steve Nash. Now, I think in the offseason, the Brooklyn Nets had a bit of pride where they didn't want to make a move based on Kevin Durant, which to me, I feel like they kind of set themselves up for failure, because the only reason they really hired Steve Nash, and I don't want to say the only reason, but a big reason why they hired Steve Nash is because Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving backed it so much. So now all of a sudden they put themselves in a position where it's like, we gave you everything you wanted. We're drawing a line here. Because you're not happy doesn't mean you're going to be able to tell us who to hire and then how to fire them. But there is a situation that's looking like maybe Kevin Durant and some of the other guys who felt the same way was right. Since I've watched the Brooklyn Nets from just a basketball perspective, taking out all of the other things that nobody could control, Steve Nash hasn't or never really showed the ability to coach this team to the level that they needed, especially this season. There was so much pressure going into the season for this team to play a high-level basketball, and they're starting off 2-5 in the first 7 games, in games which they lost to the Grizzlies, they lost to the Pacers. A team like the Pacers at home is just an unacceptable loss for a team with this much talent. I don't care what the scenario is. They just can't lose those type of games. And that's the same sentiment Kevin Durant had when he talked about the request of the trade. There were certain parts last year, even when he was hurt, where they were losing games that he felt like there's just no reason we should be losing those type of games, and great teams don't lose those type of games. So I feel like Steve Nash maybe voice kind of ran out in that locker room, number one. Number two, from an X's and O's perspective, there was no fluidity with this team or any structure that made them play at a high level, especially on the offensive side of the basketball this season. Like, all I see is ISO-heavy basketball between Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in the hopes of them doing something miraculous throughout the course of a 48-minute game to beat high-level teams. And now that you have Ben Simmons added to this puzzle, he's very unique, and you have to mix things up for him to be able to coexist and all of that, because his skill set isn't like Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving. It's going to require a certain level of coaching. The same way the Warrior system with the weaknesses of Draymond Green, how do we allow him to play at his strengths while complementing Curry and Clay and the rest of the group? You have to get very intricate to put everybody in position to be at their best, to be comfortable, to be confident, and be on all one accord. And I think Steve Nash wasn't able to figure that out for the Brooklyn Nets. Now, pivoting to the Ime Udoka hire, you have to remember in the 2020-21 season, the same year that the Brooklyn Nets lost to the Milwaukee Bucks in 7 games, Steve Nash was the coach, but a part of his assistant coaching staff was Ime Udoka. So Ime is coming back to a situation he's a little bit familiar with as far as coaching Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Again, assistant coaching is to a lesser degree than actually being the full-time head coach. Obviously, they also have Ben Simmons in this situation now, but this is a guy that's extremely familiar with this group of guys and with this team, which is why it was, I don't want to say easy, but why it was so crazy of a game plan he had against them last year in the first round where he kind of exposed them. So he's going to come in there with that familiarity. He's going to be a defensive-minded head coach. And he's going to be a guy where I don't think he's going to have to come in and gain respect. There's going to be respect there from already being here and because his team bust their ass last year. And I think that's what needed. The Nets need a voice that's going to carry in his locker room. They need a guy who's going to come in and be organized and set things up properly. And they need a guy who can fight through adversity. He is a guy that flipped around the Boston Celtics last year like that. When everything was going crazy in the first start of the season last year for the Boston Celtics, Ime Udoka was a guy that didn't break. He didn't fold under pressure. He did his job, got this group motivated in a very short amount of time, and was able to flip the switch. That has to be the idea and the thinking behind this hiring, is to bring in somebody who's familiar so we don't have to get anything reacclimated. Now, of course, there are new players and new guys, but the top portion of the team, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, they're familiar with him and his voice. There's already a trust there. And he can come in quickly, get everything together, and try to flip this season around. And I think it's not a far-fetched thing to say that. They didn't wait too long, in my opinion. They're only 2-5. This was a much better decision than to wait 20, 25 games, and now you're 8, 9, almost 10 games under 500 and all of that. They did it at the perfect time. Now, the deal will be finalized over the next 24 to 48 hours, so they might play a game or two under Jacques Vaughn as the interim head coach. But again, I think this gives the Nets more than enough time to gel with Ime Udoka for him to get this team organized and to flip everything around. One thing that I do want to address that everybody on social media is reacting to is the fact that Ime was suspended and now he's going to be coaching. I think the thing people need to remember and not forget in all of this is that Ime was suspended by the Boston Celtics. The Celtics have made it clear that they will not hold Ime back from getting another job. So in this situation, the Boston Celtics are willing to lift their suspension and let him go to coach another team. He was never suspended by the NBA. It has to be thought that teams around the league who had interest in him at all to potentially hire him away from the Boston Celtics did their research about the investigation and the situation that happened between him and that coworker he had to feel comfortable in hiring him. There's not a lot of details outside of the investigation. It was just that he said crude remarks. So outside of that, we don't know how deep or in depth it is. But based on the hiring, you have to expect or believe that the Brooklyn Nets did their due diligence and felt that it was okay to move forward. So that's all I have about that situation. I've seen that conversation happening on timeline. You have to think that if the NBA never came in and suspended him, it was just a Boston Celtic thing about policy. And now that the Brooklyn Nets and other teams who had their interest did their background search and felt it was okay to have him as a candidate to even consult or go through a hiring process or an interview, and now to move forward with the hiring, you have to think that they did their due diligence to make sure they're not going in a situation where they're hiring somebody who isn't fit or won't be able to be a coach in the NBA for whatever reason. So that's my 2 cents on that part. Again, very subtle, very rapid. Have to give credit to Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. Smith is the first person I heard when the suspension of Ime happened months ago that the reason the Celtics suspended Ime was because the fear of firing him was led to believe that he would go to the Brooklyn Nets. That's the first time I heard that months ago from Stephen A. Smith. That proves to be correct. Some of the things that I think that are going to be important keys for the Brooklyn Nets is finding identity offensively. They have to have something where Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving obviously are the heartbeat of the offense, but they have to find a way to make Ben Simmons comfortable and make him a factor. If Ben Simmons is on the court out of place, not confident and not comfortable, he's just going to be a liability. The more they can make him confident, the more they can make him comfortable, the better that offense is going to be, because Kyrie and KD are going to do their thing. They also have to get that defense up. Even when he was on the bench for the Brooklyn Nets as an assistant coach, you can see they were the best offense in the game. Their offensive rating was number 1 that season. But defensively, their defensive rating was 23rd. So I expect Ime to come in and try to bolster up that defense and get that offense in a place where it can, again, be maybe not number 1, but somewhere along the lines where it can be competent, and Ben Simmons can be a huge factor for them, because he's an integral part. He's an integral part. He's a guy that if he is playing at his highest level within this group of guys, this team could be playing at a different level. That's just something that Steve Nash couldn't figure out. Now, I'm looking at the Brooklyn Nets right now just for my own due diligence of knowing their offensive rating as we speak under Steve Nash through the course of 7 games this season is 16th, which is middle of the pack. But then defensively, their defensive rating is 30th. So I expect that to be the emphasis for Ime, because 16th you can get away with offensively, and I think the more gelling they get through over the course of 10 games, 15 games, 20 games, that offense could even go higher, because as the start of the season, I felt like they were missing just a lot of shots offensively and not in the groove of things. Pace 18th, I think that's fine for them. Anything from 18 to 13 for the Brooklyn Nets, I think it's cool, as long as you're playing with Ben. And Claxton is probably going to be a little bit slowed down, even though I know Ben is a transition guy. But him playing with Claxton probably going to slow down. And maybe you can even go up some. There's an argument that Claxton can play with a bit of pace. So I look at the defense to be the real points of emphasis for Ime to come in. And that turning around the defense can open up a lot of wins for this team. Brooklyn Nets have a talented roster. And it's going to be extremely interesting to see how fast Ime can make an impact for them defensively, especially with the names that I see. I see Ben Simmons on here. Royce O'Neal has been always been a solid defender and a plus defender coming from Utah. Joe Harris, not known for the best defense, but over the last couple of games, he's been extremely solid. Kevin Durant, when he's dialed in and locked in, he can be impactful. And I've seen flashes from Kyrie Irving. Not saying that these guys are defensive player of the year stars, but there are some things that they can hold their hat on to be a very competent defensive unit and not dead rank last. Because if you're last in the NBA, that's how you lose in games to the Indiana Pacers, where Buddy Hield is spazzing, Chris Duarte is spazzing, Tyrese Halliburton is getting into his spots. You don't want to be that type of team. So he can come in, clean that up, and it's going to be interesting to see him game plan against Boston whenever that happens, knowing that he's familiar with Tatum, Brown, their strengths, their weaknesses. And ultimately, I think this is a good move for the Brooklyn Nets to reset their season and to give this last hoorah, potentially, of the Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant one last chance, because after this season, there's no telling what Kyrie is going to do. And if this season doesn't go and show any promise and Kyrie does leave, who's to say Kevin Durant won't request a trade again? You know what I mean? This team could look extremely different next year without a Kyrie Irving. It might just be a team with Ben Simmons and Kevin Durant. So hopefully they can get it together. I cannot wait to see this team at full strength with a new coach and a new voice in the locker room. The NBA, again, is the gift that just keeps on giving. Tomorrow we may have another storyline out of thin air. As always, I am Pee Wee the Plug. This is NBA Weekly, and I will see you guys next time. I'm out. Peace.